I was thinking.
It's dangerous.
It is dangerous. Do I fall into the category now of history nerd? I don't know. Because I know more about history than at least all the topics that we've covered than your average person.
History nerd husband.
History nerd like adjacent. So would I be like history nerd friendly? Like what category do I fall into?
Well, it's not like
it's not like a moniker I'm trying to claim. Married into it.
You married into it.
I married into
so what's that
history
called?
nerddom. I don't know. I was wondering that because I mean that's what we're doing. That's second career for me, for you. Mm-hmm. It's gonna be history stuff.
History nerd in law.
History nerd in law. I don't know. For those listening, I don't know if you guys have a good thought. Reach out to me. Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jenn.
Hello. On
this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Before we jump into the episode, I do want to ask for reviews because that's the best way. It's one of the best ways really for us to grow. And it's kind of social proof for the podcast as people stumble across. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, and most people do, those reviews really do help. Even if you just go in real quick, drop us 5 stars and say, hey, love history, love the show, or love this episode, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. It really is kind of social proof as people stumble across the podcast and they go in there and search for it. And I don't think the History Channel does a lot of John Wayne topics.
No, I don't think they do.
Or history period.
History period.
So we're coming for you, History Channel. I haven't said that in a while, but History Channel, you better watch out because Jenn's writing a book and we're doing all this stuff.
Someday, right? We already said
someday.
The Chip and Joanna Gaines of history.
Today, we are embarking on a journey to explore the life and legacy of one of America's most iconic figures, the legendary John Wayne. We're taking you on an adventure to Winterset, Iowa, where we visited the very house where Marion Morrison, the man who would later become John Wayne, entered this world. It's more than just a house, it's a window into the early years of a Hollywood giant. We're going to unravel the story of John Wayne's life from his humble beginnings in Winterset to his transformation into the Duke and the enduring legacy he left on the silver screen. We'll delve deep into the roots of this cinematic legend and explore his later family life and how his own kids ventured into the film industry. So whether you're a fan of Westerns, a history buff, or just someone curious about the life of a true American icon, this episode promises to be a journey through time and cinema you won't want to miss. Without further ado, let's step back in time and experience the life and times of John Wayne as we visit his birthplace home in Winterset, Iowa. So Jenn, this was, again, at the tail end of our Western road trip, and this was a huge kind of thing for you to do. This is the one thing we did in Iowa as we were driving. So let's talk a little bit about Winterset and then the birthplace of this cinematic legend that's John Wayne.
Yeah, so pretty much the start of Walk with History, I did a lot of John Wayne research, and this was always a bucket list place for me to go because I grew up on John Wayne movies. So I always wanted to see the John Wayne Museum and the John Wayne House.
Well, and one of the things that you mentioned in the episode, and I don't think you had ever told me this, and I didn't realize it till I was watching the footage back, but you said when you started Walk with History, you were looking up John Wayne Americana and History Americana, and that was literally one of the things that inspired you to start the channel.
Yes, because people were showing some things on YouTube, but they weren't really connecting it. Like, why does this matter, or how does this impact us today? How does John Wayne impact us today? What has he left? What is his legacy? What is his Americana legacy? What did we think a lot about the West because of John Wayne. He is the Western actor of the time. Like I said, highest grossing film actor for 3 decades. He presents us with the window into a lot of these different stories and brings them to life for us.
Yeah.
And you just think of John Wayne, he is a movie star. And you think of him with the swagger, with the star, with the gun, you know, in a shootout. Like you picture John Wayne as this man who is part of building America. Now, he didn't build it per se as the Westerners really did, but he's going to personify it and show it on the silver screen.
Yeah. I just thought that was so neat that you called that out, that we were standing in the birthplace of the person who kind of inspired us to be there and to be filming to begin with. So I just thought that was really neat. And we talked briefly about, in last week's episode, which was more about his movie career. We're going to focus more on family life today, about kind of Winterset being off kind of in the middle of Iowa, off the beaten path a little bit, easy to find.
Easy to find.
The movie museum is great. And if you guys are curious about that, I'd encourage you to listen to the episode just before this. We talk about kind of more his movie career and the museum itself, but we're going to focus more on his personal life.
Sure. So the house is kind of connected with the museum. If you want to visit the museum and then go to the house, it's right next door. And his house is at 220 South 2nd Street in Winterset, Iowa. And he was born there May 26th, 1907. And it really hasn't changed a lot since then. It's a 4-bedroom house, or 4-room house. 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, 1 dining room, 1 living room. That's it. And so in the local newspaper reported 4 days after his birth that he weighed 13 pounds at birth. And so when we're in that house and I show you the room where he was born, I just comment on a 13-pound baby. I just can't even imagine the amount of emotions that might have been coming out of that room at the time.
Your words were, there's a lot of screaming going on in this room. And it's cool because they actually had the newspaper from 1907. You know, that one of the things that I noticed in the announcement of the birth of Marion Morrison was just below that was an article about how popular Uncle Tom's Cabin, the book, was at the time for whatever reason.
Well, it's 1907. It's probably getting a resurgence.
Yeah, it was probably coming back around, but it was just neat to see some of the other things in the newspaper right there. So again, the video that we made already that's been released will be linked in the show notes. So if you guys want to watch that, you can. But it was kind of neat to see what else was going on. It's 1907.
1907. You know? So Marion, it's so funny. His name is feminine when you really think about it. Marion Robert Morrison. And his middle name will be changed to Michael because they have a second boy in 1911. And they name him Michael. So they name him Robert. So they change his middle name to Michael. Now, there's no legal papers ever found to show that they did this. I think they just kind of like, as a family, did it.
Oh, interesting.
It was like they had a second boy and they really liked the name Robert, but they had given it to him. So they're like, well, we're going to kind of take it back and to give you Michael. And we're going to call him Robert.
Oh, how interesting.
So that's kind of funny.
That's funny because one of the things that I thought I actually could have done a little bit better in the video is we actually show a lot of childhood pictures kind of on the walls. And those are hard to find in Google. Like a lot of those don't pop up all the time. So it was neat to kind of see them on the wall. But I wish I would have pointed out and been more clear about who John Wayne was because he was the older brother.
He's the older brother.
It's obvious if you're looking at the pictures, but I would have liked to have called those out more.
Yeah.
Because his younger brother was always there with him in the pictures.
Yeah, he's 4 years older, and his brother will pass away 9 years before him. His brother did serve in the U.S. Navy.
Oh.
So they have a dog named Duke.
Yes.
And that is where that nickname comes from for John Wayne. And so that, and we'll get more into this, like some of his wives would call him Duke because that is the more familiar name because John Wayne is a stage name.
Right.
And even his children have the last name Morrison.
Oh.
His children don't have the last name Wayne. Now if they are in the movies like Patrick Wayne, that is again their stage name.
They adopted that.
Yes, but their legal names are Morrison.
Yeah, and I had read about how he kind of got the nickname as Duke because his dog, right? But his dog would follow him everywhere.
Yep.
And so they always kind of just became synonymous. Oh, look, there's the Duke.
Yeah, Little Duke.
Little Duke. And so I just thought that was neat. I mean, it's very Indiana Jones-esque.
Yes.
Right? Because Indiana Jones, his nickname is like, because the dog's name
is Indiana.
So I thought that was just cute.
So Wayne's father, Clyde, was the son of American Civil War veteran Marion Mitchell Morrison, which is why I like to always say that, because my maiden name was Mitchell. And then his mother, Mary Molly Brown, was from Nebraska. But there is a lot of Scottish ancestry there and Irish ancestry there. And they come from the different isles there where their family has located from. But he was raised Presbyterian. And what I see a lot of is his father's a pharmacist, and they move for his job. And so they're not from Winterset, Iowa. They're there because the pharmacy is there. And that's where the two boys are born. And it's shortly after Robert's born that they will move to California, again, for the pharmacy job.
Yeah, so he lived in Winterset for what, like 7 or 8 years?
Yeah, like 7 years.
Okay.
And then they will move to California, and they'll settle in Glendale in 1916.
Yeah, so that's my neck of the woods. I grew up in that kind of greater Glendale, Pasadena type area.
And again, his father will work as a pharmacist. And he's going to go to Glendale High School, and he's going to do sports and academics. And he doesn't quite have the grades to go to the Naval Academy. He applies.
Oh, really?
Yes, but he's not accepted because of poor grades. So he goes to USC instead.
That's right, Trojans.
It's so funny. So while he's at USC, he's 6'4.5", and he plays on the football team. But he's injured, and it's that injury. It's a collarbone injury.
Did they say what position he played?
I don't know, but I'm sure someone will know if you want to say.
If you know John Wayne played in football, reach out to us.
But he didn't injure himself playing football. He injured himself body surfing.
Oh, really?
But he never wanted to tell his football coach that.
Oh, my gosh. That's too funny.
But he loses his academic scholarship. And when he loses his scholarship, he has to leave the university. And that's when he starts working for the movies and starts doing the prop stuff and the carpentry stuff and moving stuff, and catches the eye of John Ford. So we talked about his movie career last time. This is more about his family. So I want to stress, in 1933, he gets married for the first time at 33 years old.
Yeah, and before we go on to the...
he's 26 years old.
Yeah,
sorry.
and before we go into the marriage thing too, just so people know, when you, especially in that era, in kind of the greater, I'll call it the greater Hollywood, Los Angeles area, it's very common for people to look for work. And because Hollywood is such a big industry out there, there's work to be had, right? And USC is right there near, not too far from the Hollywood area and the studios, Glendale, And so it's not surprising that if he's looking for work, that kind of, he fell into that.
Sure. I mean, even if you go to the LA area today, people always ask, are you in the industry?
Yeah. So I actually,
like, what?
I have a family friend, kind of grown up family friends, that the Gordons, one of their sons he works on props, just like my great grandfather did.
Yes.
He helps build props, and I don't know if he's still doing that, but for a long time, that's what he did for one of the studios.
Well, you live in the area, Hollywood industry, especially at the time in the 1920s, 1930s. It's a big, like you said, industry of California. Before California becomes more tech, what it is today, it is just an agricultural and Hollywood industry at the time. I mean, Disneyland was the orange grove.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to kind of call that out, because, again, you would think like, oh, maybe he was pursuing, being an actor and acting and trying, that was his way in. It probably wasn't. He probably initially was just looking for work.
Yep.
Because that's actually more common than people realize. And I'm more familiar with that, again, having grown up in that area and known people that work in different parts of that industry, and actually having, again, for those, if this is your first time listening to the show, my great grandfather was a prop master, so he built some big sets and was in charge of building sets for some very, very big movies.
Rear Window. 10 Commandments.
10 Commandments with Charlton Heston.
Greatest Show on Earth.
Yeah, so
with Charlton Heston.
So it's very common out in that area, just to kind of set the stage, give context to people who might not be from the West Coast.
Sure. So his first wife, Josephine, is the daughter of a diplomat, but she is of Spanish descent. So he's a diplomat from Spain. And he meets her, and they get married in 1933. They have 4 children.
Oh, wow.
And these are the 4: Michael Wayne, Mary, Tony Wayne, Patrick Wayne, Melinda Wayne. When you see Quiet Man and you see the 4 kids sitting in the wagon, those are his children.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Those are his 4 kids.
Okay.
So Patrick Wayne will go on to have a pretty big movie career.
Yeah, I mean, and you've seen him in other stuff.
Oh, McClintock. He's been in a lot of movies with him. He'll be in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. He's in McClintock. He's in Big Jake. So he has a pretty big career. So he will have 4 children from his first marriage. He subsequently will get divorced and marry Esperanza. She's from Latin America. He probably more than likely had an affair with her. He marries her really on the eve of his divorce from his first wife.
Oh, wow.
Now, they never have children. They're only married for, I think, like 4 years. Yeah. It was very steamy, very volatile. No, they're actually married for 8 years. She accuses him of a lot of affairs. Some are true, some are not.
Oh, wow.
She's greeted him at the door a couple times with a loaded gun.
Wow.
So you could just imagine.
I mean, it sounds like he's got a particular type.
Yeah. I think he likes this kind of...
This Latin, Spanish.
Yeah. The flair.
Yeah.
Yeah. So his third wife, again, married on the eve of divorce, Pilar, will be his last wife. They will never divorce, although they will separate. And he has 3 children with her. So you hear Aisa Wayne, who's still alive today, John Ethan Wayne, who is named after his character from The Searchers. Yeah. And he's also in the movie Big Jake, plays his grandson, even though he's his son. And then Marissa Wayne. So Aisa Wayne and Marissa Wayne, very similar sounding names, but they're all alive today. Only Patrick Wayne is alive of the first 4. And then his 3 younger ones are still alive today.
I don't think that was something I've never really thought too much about John Wayne's personal life, other than I knew he had some kids that did movies with him.
Sure.
Patrick Wayne being one of the more famous ones. But it's one of those things, it's interesting when you learn a little bit more about these historical figures, whether they're in the actors or kind of, ex-presidents or whoever it is, and you learn about like first wife. Wait, what do you mean first wife? Second wife? Oh, there was 2. No, there was 3. It gives you a little bit more more of the picture about the person than necessarily the legend that is whoever you're talking about, right? And in this case, it's John Wayne, and I'm not trying to bring him down at all. It's just interesting, as you learn more about these people who really most people know, and they're very kind of have an emotional attachment to John Wayne and his movies, and because of what he represented and what those movies often and the themes often represented. It's always interesting to learn a little bit more about the person that's behind the curtain. Well,
I would say John Wayne is, for lack of the better words, a typical movie star of the time.
Yeah.
Because these men of the time, if you think of Clark Gable, if you're thinking of Jimmy Stewart is an anomaly. He will stay married to his one and only wife for his whole life. But there are some who they do have affairs. They have different women, and it is kind of more acceptable and almost like encouraged of leading men because it makes this draw about them.
Yeah, and I think of the time too. I don't know if it would be encouraged, but it's not as easily publicized as compared to things like today.
Oh yeah,
if somebody suspected something, well, it's harder to catch someone in the act. There's not everybody has their cell phone in their pocket with a camera.
Sure.
Right. And then to actually publish something, and Hollywood industry at the time had a lot of power.
Oh, yeah.
So that's interesting to kind of get a peek behind that curtain.
But he's a big family man, and they even talk about that in the museum.
Oh, okay.
So big car
to
get the 7 children in. He has a ship or boat called, I would say, a small ship called the Wild Goose that he ports in Long Beach, and he likes to take it out to Catalina. And big family guy, likes to have his kids with him. There's lots of pictures of him celebrating Christmases with all 7 children, or Easters with all 7 children. He built the John Wayne Tennis Club in Newport Beach in 1973. Wow. He just was very big into having these places to be with his family. It is now the Palisades Tennis Club.
Oh, okay.
So he is this guy who really does love his family around him. Now, even though him and Pilar are going to separate in 1973, and he lives till 1979, they will never divorce. And she is very adamant to let people know they never divorced. Now, he will go on to have a relationship with his personal assistant, and she writes a book, I think, called John Wayne and Me, and I actually read that book. And then they became boyfriend, girlfriend, and she took care of him basically towards the end of his life. And if you ever hear what John Wayne's last words were, it's, "Of course I know who you are. You're my girl." And he said it to her.
Oh.
So he was like, she had come in to check on him in the hospital room. And she said, "Do you know who I am?" And he goes, "Of course I know who you are. You're my girl."
Oh, I didn't know that.
So that's his last words were to her.
Were to her. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's actually, it's funny because I actually made a YouTube short about that tends to get a decent amount of traffic. Mm-hmm. I don't think I realized that.
Yeah. It was his former secretary, Pat Stacy. And she published a book called Duke, A Love Story. And I read that book. It's fine. It's good, but it just gives you the background into the end of his life. His hair began to thin in the 1940s, and he would wear a hairpiece. So you can see this a lot, like Frank Sinatra wore a hairpiece, and different people of the time. Again, I think Gene Kelly wore a hairpiece. And so there would be pictures of him without his hairpiece on. Like I think he went to Gary Cooper's funeral without the hairpiece, so you could see his thinning hair. And then when he was at Harvard, he had gone there. They do those awards. What are they called? The Lampoon Awards, where they the Razzies, where they give you, and they were making fun of him for some role. And John Wayne took pride in accepting the award. He showed up in a tank, and it was really great. He really embodied, being a part of this persona. Huh. And they asked him about the hair. Is it true your toupee is real hair? And he responded, "Well, sir, that's real hair, not mine, but real hair."
So he wasn't afraid to joke about it.
No, he actually, and they say a lot that Duke's personality and sense of humor is very close to what people would see in the big screen when he was joking. Is really, that's kind of who he was. So towards the end of his life, he will get cancer. And he's the one who they think coined the term the big C.
Oh, really?
So that's what he would call it, the big C.
Oh, interesting.
He had lung cancer, and then he had one of his lungs removed and 2 ribs removed right before he shot The Sons of Katie Elder. And we talk about this. He wanted to do his own stunts in The Sons of Katie Elder. And if you watch that movie, he's kind of dragged through like a river, and he ends up getting, not really a river, like a stream, and he ends up getting pneumonia. And with the one lung, he was very close to being close to death there. But he was so adamant that he could still do all these stunts that he really put his life in jeopardy during that. Then towards the end of his life, in 1979, the cancer had come back, and he had volunteered to do a volunteer study, and he had checked himself into the hospital there in LA for the study, and he ends up passing away there.
Oh, wow. And
he actually passes away in June of 1979, actually June 11th, 1979.
Oh, really?
Our daughter's birthday.
Yeah.
But he will appear at the Oscars that year. So that's his last public appearance. So earlier in the year, that's the last time you will see John Wayne. And he's a lot different. He's a lot thinner.
Sure. And
for a 6'4.5" man who was always pretty big, and to see him then, it was just a change of who he was. But he ends up, leaving the Wild Goose, docked in Newport Beach. It's listed on the U.S. Registry of Historic Places. There's a lot of pictures of him with that boat or ship. He really did enjoy it.
There was a lot in the movie museum part of things. They show a lot of pictures of him on the boat, and that's kind of how I always pictured him as well, as someone. Not only, the movie star, but when not out there making movies, like you said, a family man who's out there doing stuff, right? He's out there fishing. He's out there, hunting and doing all those kinds of things. I mean, that's why I kind of find it amusing that he hurt his knee while he was in college body surfing.
Yes.
Right? Because here's a guy just like anything at the time. Like, in that era, you're not sitting around watching TV all the time. You're out there doing stuff, and that's who he was, and he really did embody that.
There's been some controversy around John Wayne. The Playboy interview is probably the biggest one, where he was interviewed for Playboy in 1971, and he was talking in support of Vietnam, and he made it very clear that he was in support of Vietnam. He also talked about he believed in white supremacy.
Really?
And he says, I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to the point of responsibility.
Oh, wow.
And so he felt, and I don't know exactly how he felt, but what he says here and how I interpret it is that it's a white person's responsibility to educate and bring up the people who have been oppressed. And he almost feels like he believes until people can be to the point of being educated and to hand it over, that the white supremacy is more like white responsibility is what I read from this. And I'm not trying to make excuses for him.
No,
but that's how I'm reading his words.
And one of the things, right, as we kind of joked about in the beginning, I'm not the history guy, but I've married into the history world. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've seen, from some of these historic characters, like the John Waynes and like some others, that are much more controversial. A lot of times, I'll say the way that I interpret it from what I see and what they say or what they're trying to say is they don't necessarily have the vocabulary that we have developed, however many years later today. I'd say, society today is a lot better educated when it comes to talking about race and talking about, past enslavement and kind of, those things evolve. I mean, we even joke about who is it that you visited when you were out in Mississippi in Emmett Till?
Oh, my Miss Heron.
Miss Heron, right? And so people use the language that they grew up and were taught with. And you kind of really have to take the time and see what they said, right? And again, unless they write down somewhere or they say how they feel, you kind of have to interpret a little bit. But again, a lot of times they just don't have the language that we would have, right? Take John Wayne and transport him 50 years into the future to today.
Yes.
And he may have said that in a much more, by today's standards, today's lens that we view things through, in a much more socially acceptable manner.
Sure.
Right? Again, you and I are very much interpreting here, but you have to remember that.
You have to remember that. And so I always look for people said this and what did they do?
Right.
Right? And so John Wayne on the set of The Searchers, if you think of the American Indian woman on The Searchers who plays the bride of the boy, right? John Wayne found her crying on set and he was like, what are you upset about? And she goes, I'm going to miss my son's graduation from high school. John Wayne shut down the set and flew her back to LA so she could attend his graduation. So I don't think, and again, I think, like you said, people don't have the words in the 1970s. Even today, people are still looking for the right way to express themselves with the clear words, because really finding the right word for a feeling is a difficult thing to do. And I think with John Wayne, I think his heart is in the right place for me when I base it on his actions than what he's trying to say or interpret or in one interview one time. And this is what Patrick Wayne kind of gets into after this interview resurfaces again in 2019. People want to change the John Wayne Airport. And his son defends him, saying it would be an injustice to judge someone based on an interview that's being taken out of context.
Yeah. And that's what you and I really try hard to do is paint the picture and give you the context, you the listener that's listening to this episode. We try to give you the context and we try to frame it in such a way that we're not leaning one way or the other, but we try to really understand what it was like back then and also identify the lens that we view things through now.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
If you can identify that, you're going to understand history a lot better. You're going to understand what these historic figures are saying in public, in interviews, in what letters they write, much better if you understand, one, the glasses that we look at things through.
Yes.
And two, the context of the time.
And like I said, I like to tell you what people said. I also like to tell you what people did. Again, you can make up your mind of how you feel about John Wayne, and you can tell us in the comments how you feel about him, because I know people have different feelings about him. But for the most part, what I want you to know and understand is, as a historian, our job and my job, when I talk to people like Miss Heron, who was brought up in the times of Mississippi, I want to understand where they're coming from, start to pose the questions and get in their mind. And when you really start to change hearts, you really have to understand where someone's coming from. And if you really want change, and if that's what we want in this world, is to change people and use history as a catalyst. So don't repeat history. Don't do the same things historically. If we want to use history as a catalyst, then we really have to treat people with respect where they're at, understand where they're coming from, and really empathize, and then start to ask questions and get that change of heart if that's what we're looking for. So again, as a historian, and I love John Wayne. I wanted to talk about his family, his love of his family, and I want to paint the picture. 3 wives, 7 kids, and had this Playboy interview, acted differently in real life. And part of his grave, when he finally passes away in June of 1979, he's buried at Pacific View Memorial Park. And he has not an ornate tombstone. We've talked about this before. He's buried in the same cemetery as Jimmy Stewart, not far actually away from Jimmy Stewart. Flat tombstone, nothing even that sticks out of the ground. And it says, "Tomorrow comes clean with no mistakes in it. And we hope that we have learned something from yesterday to do our best for tomorrow." And that is from the same interview. So I'm just putting that out there. That is what's on his tombstone. That's the same interview. And what I hear when I hear this is someone who admits that they're still learning in life and not always right.
Yeah. And that's incredibly important. And again, we've seen that a couple times. We've talked about some controversial things that historical figures will say or do. And later in life, you see their actions change that support what you would assume is them learning and them accepting and coming around to what we today would consider more socially acceptable. So we've had the privilege of delving deep into the life and legacy of John Wayne, right from the heart of Winterset, Iowa, where it all began. It's incredible how a small house in a quiet town can be the birthplace of a Hollywood legend. As we've explored the life of John Wayne, we also uncovered the deep connections between his early years and the unforgettable characters he portrayed on the big screen. We hope you've enjoyed this journey through time and cinema as we've enjoyed it bringing it to you. If you found this episode as fascinating as we did, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends, family, and fellow history and film enthusiasts. And remember, the John Wayne Birthplace home in Winterset, Iowa is not just a house. It's a symbol and testament to the power of dreams, determination, and the enduring appeal of storytelling. Thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast. If you know someone else that might enjoy this, again, please share it with them. We rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.